The sun broke through the leaves of the trees, casting a soft light on the still young earth. There, at the beginning of time, everything was new, fresh, and mysterious. The earth exuded a scent of hope, and the rivers flowed clean and free, winding through valleys never before trodden. It was in this setting that Adam and Eve lived, expelled from paradise but full of courage to start over. They worked with their own hands, sweating as they planted each seed and learning the meaning of effort. From their union, 2 sons were born, Cain and Abel. The firstborn, Cain, was a strong boy with a determined look and calloused hands. He loved the earth and everything that grew from it. From an early age, he enjoyed the smell of wet earth, watching plants grow, and carefully choosing where to sow his seeds. He took pride in planting each fruit and harvesting each vegetable, feeling part of the silent transformation of the earth. Abel, his younger brother, was calm and had a peaceful heart. He felt a deep connection with animals, tended the flocks, fed the sheep, and spoke to them as if they were part of his own family. Although they lived together, each followed his own path, and so they grew up side by side, learning from their new life about faith, hope, and challenges. One day, both felt in their hearts the desire to thank God. Cain gathered the best that the earth had to offer: ripe fruits, lush vegetables, golden grains. He made a beautiful basket, arranging each item with care and affection. Abel, on the other hand, chose the fattest and healthiest of the lambs in his flock, the one with soft wool that jumped excitedly through the fields. He set the animal aside as a precious gift. Then came the moment of offering. The sky seemed silent, as if the world were holding its breath. Both placed their gifts before the altar. Cain's eyes sparkled with expectation, for he had brought the best he had. But before them, an invisible tension was building. God gladly accepted Abel's offering, smiling benevolently at him. Cain's offering, however, was rejected. There was no thunder or lightning, only heavy silence, the silence of disappointment. Cain felt his heart sink. How could his gift not be enough? Why did God's choice seem so harsh? Anger and jealousy began to grow inside Cain, like weeds sprouting in the middle of a field. He looked at Abel, who smiled humbly, without malice. But to Cain, that smile seemed like a taunt. As he walked through the field, he felt a storm brewing in his chest. The fact that God had preferred his brother's offering hurt him deeply. He wanted to understand why, but his hurt prevented him from seeing clearly. The sunset cast long shadows on the earth, and in Cain's soul, the darkness was even stronger. That night, the wind whispered warnings that Cain could not hear. And so, consumed by resentment and loneliness, he took the first step to change not only his history, but that of all mankind. What would Cain do in the face of this dilemma? How would he face the pain of rejection and the temptation of jealousy? The next morning, Cain got up early, but he didn't feel the same enthusiasm as other days. The earth, which had once seemed friendly, was now cold under his bare feet. As he plowed the soil, he remembered the sleepless night, when sleep did not come and the silence was heavy. Abel's calm and innocent gaze haunted him. Cain wondered why his efforts had not been recognized, why everything he had planted, watered, and harvested seemed to have no value to God. Jealousy grew like a dark shadow inside him, and his love for his brother turned into anguish and isolation. God, knowing Cain's thoughts, spoke gently to his heart, trying to bring him back to the path of light. "Why are you so sad, Cain? Why do you allow envy to take hold of you? If you act correctly, you will also be accepted. But if you allow sin to grow, it will be at your door, wanting to dominate you. It is up to you to overcome it." But the words seemed distant. Although he tried to understand, Cain could not control his anger. The days passed, and he grew more distant from his family, avoiding Abel's gaze and keeping a heavy weight in his heart. One day, Cain called Abel to the field where they had so often worked together. Abel followed him, confident that his brother wanted to talk. The sky was clear, the wind blew gently, but there was something different about that morning. When they were alone, the conflict exploded inside Cain. Overcome by such intense and confusing emotions, envy was stronger than love. He acted without thinking and took his own brother's life, thus sealing the first great mistake of humanity. Soon after, realizing what he had done, Cain felt the weight of regret. The field, once full of life, seemed deserted. He knew he couldn't go back. He couldn't undo that pain. Then God spoke again to his heart with compassion and justice. "Cain, where is Abel, your brother?" And Cain, overcome with shame and fear, replied, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" But God already knew the truth. Abel's voice cried out from the ground, and Cain's mistake would follow him for the rest of his days. His punishment was to no longer have peace, and wherever he went, his conscience would be marked by the weight of his deed. Thus, Cain wandered the world, feeling empty, learning with every step the value of responsibility, forgiveness, and the difficult task of overcoming our own feelings. Cain's journey, marked by guilt, still had many chapters to come. What would he find along the way? How would he try to redeem himself before himself and the Creator? Cain left the scene of his crime carrying not only the weight of his mistake, but also a deep mark on his soul. The trees fell silent as he passed. The wind seemed to blow the leaves away from under his feet, and not even the birds looked at him anymore. Loneliness was now his only friend, and where once there had been a family, only memories remained. With every step, Abel's face came to mind. It was impossible to forget the sparkle in his brother's eyes, the simple joy with which he tended the flock. Guilt squeezed Cain's chest like a cold hand. There was no point in running away, for his mistake walked with him. The land that had so often given him fruit now refused his efforts. No matter how hard he worked, the soil seemed barren, as if it rejected his seeds. Cain realized that the punishment came not only from God, but also from nature itself, which no longer welcomed his work. On lonely nights, he looked up at the sky in search of some answer. The silence, however, was complete. Still, in the midst of his despair, Cain began to feel something different, a restlessness, a small flame of desire to find meaning in his suffering. Walking along unknown paths, he encountered other people he did not know, and who looked at him with suspicion. Cain felt like a stranger everywhere. The mark on his life set him apart, and he understood that he would live protected by God, but at the same time isolated from others. It was at this point of pain and isolation that Cain began to search within himself for understanding. One cold morning, as he listened to the delicate sound of branches in the wind, Cain finally felt tired of fighting against his own heart. He fell to his knees and, through his tears, recognized that he needed to change, that he couldn't let envy and anger define his future. Even alone, he spoke to God, asking for strength to control his emotions and for the past not to determine his entire history. Over time, he noticed small signs of hope. Little by little, the earth sprouted. The weight on his chest became a little lighter. Cain began to take care of what little he had, quietly rebuilding his life with humility and hard work. He realized that his greatest enemy was his own pride and that, in order to move forward, he would need to learn to forgive himself. However, inside him, the doubt remained. Would it be possible, after all, to find true forgiveness from God, from himself, and perhaps even from his own brother? The years passed, and Cain's face gradually acquired marks as deep as those on his soul. Exile had turned him into a man of withdrawn gestures, watchful eyes, and an almost silent voice. For a long time, he avoided cities and villages, planting small seeds in forgotten clearings and gathering what the earth, with resistance, allowed to grow. The silence of the world around him kept out noise, but the cries of guilt remained present, echoing tirelessly every time he closed his eyes at nightfall. On one of those long, cold nights, a strange flash streaked across the sky. Cain, restless, left his makeshift tent to contemplate the phenomenon. The fire above seemed to whisper memories of the past, rekindling the forgotten pain of what he had been and what he had become. He knelt on the damp grass, raising his hands in search of a sign, some indication that there was still a divine gaze upon him. A solitary question formed, stronger than all the previous ones. Why go on? What was the point of a life marked only by pain and remorse? The next morning, while fetching water, Cain came across a group of travelers camped near the river. Instinctively, he thought of hiding, but hunger and exhaustion spoke louder. He approached slowly, wary of suspicious glances. An elderly man with a kind expression crossed Cain's path, offering him a piece of bread and a cordial gesture without questions or judgment. It was at that moment that Cain understood something new about suffering, the silent solidarity among the rejected. He sat down with the others, listening to stories of loss, exile, and overcoming adversity. He saw in the faces of those men and women the scars of the world, different from his own, but just as deep. Living together brought new challenges. Among strangers, Cain faced the constant fear of being discovered. Every night, he wondered if anyone there would recognize his burdened shadow, if Abel's name still echoed in that distant land. However, slowly, he realized that everyone there carried their own shadows. This mutual recognition of flaws brought Cain closer to the others. For the first time since the crime, he felt that it was possible to help, to care, to build something small amid the ruins. He planted, shared grains, healed minor wounds, and listened attentively to the heavy silences of confessions. The guilt did not disappear, but it lost its suffocating power. Cain understood that life, even wounded, could find purpose again in discreet generosity, in the humble sharing of what little one had. However, one night, rumors of righteous people seeking revenge reached the camp. Fear returned with overwhelming force. Now Cain had to decide, would he flee again, perpetuating his isolation? Or would he stay and finally face the full consequences of his past? The dilemma consumed him, testing everything he had learned about redemption, courage, and faith. He felt stronger, but at the same time as vulnerable as on that first day when he had been condemned to wander. The future looked bleak, and Cain knew that the choice he made now would forever define the meaning of the forgiveness he had sought so long. The news that men were coming after Cain spread a cold fear among the exiles in the camp. Whispers filled the night, names were muttered cautiously, and some began to pack their belongings, ready to disappear at a moment's notice. Cain, sitting under a twisted olive tree, saw fear grow around him like weeds. He knew that if he ran away again, he would condemn everyone to helplessness. He saw the trust falter in the eyes of the old man who had taken him in, and in the sparkle of the children's eyes, he saw hope crawling away. The weight of the past became almost unbearable. That night seemed darker, the cold wind cut through his skin, and the silence made every thought hurt. Cain knew he was the cause of the threat, but there was nowhere left to hide. Years of guilt had taught him that no escape would erase his history. So he overcame the urge to run. He sought out the elder and, with a steady voice, confessed who he was and the crime he had committed. He waited for condemnation, contempt, even expulsion, but the old man silently raised his weathered face and placed his hand on Cain's shoulder. In his tired eyes, there was understanding. Around them, others who had been fearful approached. Their lives were also made up of escapes, scars, and unpayable debts. The shared secret united that community as never before. At dawn, when the distant dust of the hunters appeared on the horizon, no one was willing to hand Cain over. The camp rose up around him. They were few, armed only with courage and compassion. Cain felt for the first time that he was embraced not only by hands, but by hearts capable of seeing beyond the mark he carried. Fear still existed, but now it was faced in unity. At that moment, something inside Cain changed. He felt a gentle warmth blossom in his chest, a sense of forgiveness springing not from outside, but from within. For the first time, he prayed with gratitude, not with requests. He prayed for those around him, wishing for protection not only for himself, but for all those marked by pain. On the brink of possible tragedy, a silent miracle happened. Cain's hardened heart softened, and in sharing his fragility, he found strength and a spark of redemption where before there had only been despair. The sky awoke covered in thick clouds as the group of strangers approached the camp. The wind seemed to hold its breath, as if awaiting the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. Cain, standing in the center of that human circle, felt the weight and, at the same time, a strange lightness invade his spirit. His companions stood beside him, silent but steadfast, staring at the distant dust with more faith than fear. Time seemed to stand still when the hunters stopped at the edge of the clearing, staring at the exiles with suspicion. Cain raised his empty hands, showing that he did not seek a fight. Hard stares fell on his mark, which burned more visibly in the dim light of dawn. A heavy silence fell, like a thick veil separating the past from the present. At that moment, A breeze whipped Cain's tired face and seemed to whisper veiled words of courage. He felt that invisible presence that had accompanied him so many times, sometimes in rebuke, sometimes in care. The time of deception and hiding was over, and everything within him yearned for absolute redemption. With a calm voice, Cain took a step forward and, before those who condemned him without knowing, confessed aloud his identity and his crime. He did not seek to justify himself. He let the tears flow freely and revealed to all the long journey of pain, loneliness, and search for forgiveness. During his confession, the light of heaven broke through the clouds and a golden ray descended, touching the ground before Cain. The fresh scent of renewed earth spread. A sudden peace enveloped those who were there, as if a protective hand hovered over them all. The hunters, surprised by his sincerity, noticed the change in that marked man. They saw there not the murderer of the feared myth, but someone broken and rebuilt by his own faith. The exiles, moved, approached, forming a barrier of acceptance and protection around Cain. There, in the brief miracle of collective forgiveness, they felt divine action touch every heart. Some wept, others knelt, and prayer rose spontaneously, crossing the sky in light. The ancestral weight of guilt lost its power, and Cain, for the first time, saw himself not as a fugitive, but as someone redeemed by the courage to expose his truth and by the grace that, without knowing it, he had cultivated in the silence of suffering. The new dawn brought hope, a lesson that faith, when unarmed, carries within itself the power to transform even the deepest scars. As the golden glow still spread over the camp, Cain remained motionless, feeling the inexplicable warmth run through every inch of his skin. The voices sounded muffled around him, like the distant echo of a river after a storm. His eyes fixed on the half-open sky, where the light was slowly dissipating, and there he understood that there was something greater silently at work in his destiny. The silence ceased when the hunters, now confused by the confession and the unexpected peace that had overcome everyone, retreated. There were no accusations, but a look of recognition of the weight that Cain carried. One of them, older, approached, his steps marked by time. He looked Cain in the eyes and saw in them a reflection of his own human suffering, of the pains that no exile can erase without the living presence of hope. With a simple gesture, he crossed his arms over his chest and signaled respect. It was the definitive acceptance of Cain's past, a recognition shared by everyone there. The wind blew more gently, causing the tents to sway in unison with each person's heart. Little by little, the camp, infected by Cain's transformation, came together in a perfect circle. The elder, once so strong, shed quiet tears, aware that he was witnessing a rare moment of reconciliation and learning. Cain, his voice still choked with emotion, fell to his knees, no longer out of shame or guilt, but out of a feeling of deep gratitude. Memories of Abel, of the fields once red with blood, of the years of loneliness and flight, now returned as indispensable lessons. He finally understood that all the suffering had not been imposed on him merely as punishment, but as a path to understanding the value of life, forgiveness of himself, and humility before others. Throughout his journey, Cain felt that the mark he bore had never been merely a punishment, but a living reminder that transformation is possible. Around him, the group whispered words of hope and future. Faith expanded, not as a promise of absence of pain, but as a certainty that any pain can be redeemed in community and courage. The cycle of escape ended there, not because the past was forgotten, but because, at last, it found shelter in the present. Cain raised his eyes to the sky and, in a moment of absolute understanding, realized the purpose of it all: to go through the darkness to learn to care for the light that is born after repentance. The climax of that journey was not survival, but the birth of a new life, made of surrender, trust, and the promise to never walk alone again. The orange-tinged horizon announced that this would be a different day. For the first time since the crime he had committed, Cain felt his body light as he walked, as if the earth, his ally after so long of rejection, was welcoming him back. Around him, life in the camp took on a new rhythm. Those who had once been steeped in mistrust now shared work, laughter, and stories around the fire. The scars of the past, which had once separated them, now united them, creating bonds of solidarity. Cain found joy in small gestures, offering seeds to the youngest, caring for a sick child, comforting a companion tormented by bitter memories. The others, watching, began to see him not as a fugitive, but as a brother. Trust was slowly reborn, like a sprout breaking through the earth after a long drought. In his waking moments, Cain would look up at the night sky, searching for signs of the divine presence. This time, the silence did not frighten him. Instead, it was like an embrace from God, enveloping him without demanding words, only presence. The scars of guilt did not disappear, but they came to be seen as chapters in a book of lessons. The entire group was transformed. They learned that mistakes do not define us forever. They looked at each other with more compassion. Each sincere hug, each vote of confidence was a victory over despair. Cain realized that by forgiving himself, he had made room for hope in all the hearts around him. The ground, once barren beneath Cain's feet, now bore fruit in abundance. The camp prospered as never before and soon became a shelter for other wanderers. Cain's story, told without reservation, became a daily reminder that every fall can be transformed into redemption. The old fear of being forever an outcast was replaced by a peace that came from the love he had received and the love he was finally able to offer. And so, the journey was no longer about escape or punishment, but about new beginnings, growth, and a definitive sense of belonging. At nightfall, the camp was immersed in a deep serenity, as if the entire universe were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Cain woke up before the first rays of sunlight, feeling an irresistible call to go out alone and contemplate the field that stretched beyond the tents. Before him, the land that had once denied him fruit was moist, pulsing with silent life. With each step, he saw new shoots pushing through the soil, opening into green leaves that glistened like he had never seen before. A thick dew glistened all around, as if each drop were a fragment of a promise fulfilled. Then something unexpected captured his senses, a soft, unfamiliar breeze carried with it the scent of ripe wheat, and a warmth spread through Cain's chest. He heard, coming from the depths of his soul, words without voice, "You are no longer alone." There, he knelt among the shoots, his hands touching the fertile ground, feeling the warmth of the earth and, at the same time, a luminous force enveloping him from within. The marks on his skin seemed to glow in the dim light of dawn, not as a sign of pain, but as a testimony of overcoming and miracle. As he remained with his eyes closed, the scent of the field intensified. When he opened his eyes, he realized that others in the camp had awakened, attracted by that ethereal atmosphere. One by one, they approached Cain. No one spoke, but they all felt the same intensity. They were on blessed ground. The youngest boy in the camp, who had previously feared Cain, held out his hands to him, offering him the first sheaf of newly sprouted wheat. It was a simple gesture, but everyone there felt that something great had happened. An overwhelming peace took hold of the place and the hearts of everyone. Deep inside Cain, the certainty grew that all the pain, loss, and journey had served to prepare him for that moment. A voice resounded in his soul. The promise had been fulfilled. The exile was over. Together, they camped there. And in that circle they found what they had been searching for from the beginning: belonging, hope, and the confirmation that through faith and inner transformation, the impossible became possible. The old guilt gave way to an immense and silent love, capable of healing even the deepest wounds. The miracle was not only the wheat sprouting from the earth, but the profound restoration of each life gathered there, finally sealing the reward of faith. The sun rose fully, warming each face with the golden light of a new era. There, together with the transformed field, men, women, and children immersed themselves in respectful silence. No words could express the depth of the peace they felt. The wheat danced in the wind, singing a melody of new beginnings. Cain, who once believed himself incapable of forgiveness, stared at his hands and the scars he bore. He no longer felt shame. Those marks were symbols of courage and growth. He walked among his companions, offering smiles and help, seen not for his mistakes, but for the love he now distributed. Parents embraced their children, friends shared bread, and stories of pain were transformed into memories of overcoming adversity. The camp, once a refuge for fugitives, became a community of hope, welcoming those who sought healing. The cycle of hatred and guilt was finally broken. For each one had learned there that even the greatest failure can be redeemed by sincere repentance and a real desire to change. Cain looked up to the heavens, silently thanking the force that had never abandoned him even when he was lost. Now he understood. True redemption was born when he admitted his mistakes, faced them, and surrendered to the process of transformation. He looked around and realized that the promise of a new beginning had been fulfilled not only for him, but for all who had learned from his story. Forgiveness, the fruit of faith and love, spread like fertile seed, blossoming in every life present there. The past of shame and escape no longer ruled his steps. Now it was kindness, pure and true, that guided him. He then understood the deepest spiritual lesson. It is possible to be born again every time we allow ourselves to change, when we welcome others, when we let love overcome fear and guilt. Cain found peace and belonging, courageously rewriting his own destiny. If you were moved by this story, leave a like, tell us what you felt in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more transformative stories like this one.